Imagine this: you're hunkered down in a freezing foxhole somewhere in the mud. And the dark of the Ardennes forest, the German machine guns are hammering away at your position, spitting fire that cuts trees in half, and all you've got is a bolt-action rifle, a great gun, mind you, reliable as an old mule, but slow you fire. Once you cycle the bolt, you fire again if you're lucky. That's 2 rounds downrange, while the enemy's got 10 coming at you, and you know right then and there that the fundamental problem of modern war isn't courage, because every man out there is brave as a lion. The problem is firepower. It's the sheer weight of lead. You can put down range in the shortest amount of time. And for a long time, the American soldier, the G, was fighting that fight with one hand tied behind his back, relying on a rifle design that was already a couple of decades old, and then it arrived, an 8-shot gift of glorious noise. A rifle that was so ahead of its time, it forced every other major power on Earth to play catch-up. A rifle that truly changed the sound of the battlefield forever. The M1 Garand. Folks, if that image of American ingenuity under fire gets your blood pumping like it does mine. And let me tell you, after 50 years of sifting through these incredible stories, the thrill never fades. You're in for a treat, because today we're diving deep into the most significant infantry weapon of the Second World War. We're going to trace its journey from a brilliant but stubborn inventor's drawing board, right through the smoky jungles of Guadalcanal to the icy beaches of Normandy, revealing exactly how this magnificent piece of engineering gave the individual G a decisive tactical edge against his Axis opponents, and literally revolutionized American infantry warfare. So do me a huge favor right now, hit that subscribe button to officially join our community of history enthusiasts. Give this video a big thumbs up if you love these tales of American grit, and share it with your friends who can't get enough of World War II lore. Let's keep these incredible stories alive. Now settle in, because we're not just talking about metal and wood here. We're talking about the difference between winning a firefight and just holding the line. We're talking about the weapon that General George S. Patton himself called the greatest battle implement ever devised. You know, the funny thing about the greatest innovations in history is that they almost always start with one person seeing a problem that everyone else has simply learned to live with. And for the American military in the early 20th century, the problem was the Springfield M1903, a legendary rifle, absolutely accurate, immensely powerful, and incredibly reliable. But it was slow because every time you fired a round, you had to physically reach up, cycle the bolt, eject the spent casing, shove a new round into the chamber, and take aim, all while someone else was actively trying to kill you. And in the static trench warfare of World War I, the limitations of that bolt-action design became brutally clear. The only way to increase the rate of fire was to lug around a heavy Browning automatic rifle or a crew-served machine gun, which wasn't always practical for the lone rifleman. Enter John C. Garand, a quiet, almost painfully modest Canadian-born engineer who worked at the Springfield Armory, the heart of American small arms development. Garand wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a war hero. He was a tinkerer, a genius who saw the potential for a rifle to harness its own power to reload itself. And that idea, that concept of a semi-automatic rifle for the average infantryman, became his absolute life's work. It dominated his waking hours and probably his sleeping ones too. Now, this wasn't an easy path. Garand started development way back in the early 1920s. And let me tell you, the military brass at the time was skeptical. Not because they didn't want a semi-automatic rifle, they certainly did, but because they were fighting an entrenched enemy, the inertia of tradition, and the incredible difficulty of perfecting the mechanism. See, a semi-automatic rifle has to do two things perfectly. It has to cycle reliably in every conceivable condition: mud, sand, water, cold, heat, and it has to handle the immense pressure of the cartridge without tearing itself apart or flying apart in the soldier's face. And for years Garand tinkered. He experimented with different calibers, different gas systems. Initially he thought a gas trap system, where the muzzle blast itself would cycle the action, was the way to go. That system proved to be far too complicated, dirty, and unreliable in the field. You could practically hear the generals sighing every time a test model failed. This phase of development, from the mid-20s to the mid-30s, was a masterclass in persistence. Garand didn't give up. He kept refining, he kept simplifying. He kept listening to the complaints of the test officers, and finally he arrived at the elegant solution: the gas port system. Instead of catching the gas at the muzzle, he tapped a tiny bit of gas from the barrel further back, channeling that pressure through a small piston to cycle the action. A much simpler, cleaner, and vastly more reliable design. And by 1936, after years of grueling testing and refinement, the United States Army adopted the weapon, officially designating it the rifle caliber 30 M1, but history remembers it simply as the Garand. Now, getting the M1 adopted was one thing, but getting it into the hands of hundreds of thousands of soldiers was a challenge of an entirely different magnitude. The rifle itself was complex too. Manufacture it had dozens of small precision-machined parts, and America was still deep in the throes of the Great Depression. The initial production was agonizingly slow. Only a handful of rifles were made each month, but then the winds of war began to blow across Europe and the Pacific, and suddenly the production of the M1 Garand became the single most critical manufacturing task in the entire American small arms industry. The government poured millions into expanding the Springfield Armory and contracting with companies like the Winchester Repeating Arms Company to mass-produce the weapon. And this is where the American industrial engine truly kicked into high gear, turning out these complex instruments of war at a pace no other nation could match. That industrial capacity, that ability to flood the front lines with superior equipment, is as much a part of the M1's legacy as Garand's initial genius. What made the M1 so revolutionary wasn't just that it was semi-automatic. After all, other nations were experimenting with the concept too. But it was the combination of fire rate and reliability. And let's not forget that iconic 8-round end-block clip. That little steel clip was the heart and soul of the M1's speed advantage. You took a fully loaded clip, you pressed it down into the receiver with a satisfying thunk, and suddenly you had 8 rounds ready to go. No fiddling with individual cartridges, no slowly cycling. A bolt action. That 8-round capacity, coupled with the semi-automatic action, meant the average American G could put out accurate fire 3 to 5 times faster than his German or Japanese counterpart, who was still relying primarily on the Mauser K9 8K or the Arasaka Type 99, both excellent rifles, both bolt-action. Think about the psychological impact of that in a firefight, especially in the thick jungle of the Pacific Islands, where visibility was measured in feet, not yards. The Japanese infantryman armed with his 5-round bolt-action Arasaka would engage the American forces, and he'd expect to hear the cycle-fire cycle rhythm of the bolt-action that he was used to. But what he heard from the American lines was boom dash 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 boom silence, then the unmistakable, chilling sound of the clip ejecting the iconic M1 ping, and that sound became a signal of American dominance. It was the sound of a G reloading and preparing to unleash another 8 rounds. And that sustained volume of fire, that ability to keep the enemy's head down, became a defining feature of the American fighting style. I've read countless accounts from veterans about the sheer confidence the Garand instilled in them. They weren't just holding a rifle, they were holding a promise of superior firepower. One Marine recounted facing a sudden Japanese banzai charge on Guadalcanal, and the only thing that saved his position was the sustained roar of M1's firing and reloading and firing again. That continuous stream of lead just broke the charge's momentum, something he swore a line of M1903s could never have achieved. It was the tactical edge the M1 provided that truly revolutionized how battles were fought. The infantry squad was no longer reliant on just 1 or 2 bars for automatic fire. Every rifleman was essentially carrying his own squad support weapon, a rapid-fire rifle capable of both accurate long-range shooting and overwhelming close-quarters defense. This shift wasn't theoretical, it manifested in the doctrine. The U.S. Army began teaching its infantrymen from the moment they picked up the M1. They emphasized fire and movement, the ability to suppress the enemy with continuous fire while advancing, or maneuvering, something that's only possible with a semi-automatic weapon. Suddenly, the individual soldier was transformed from a static marksman into a mobile engine of sustained firepower capable of suppressing a machine gun nest or clearing a trench with a ferocity no one had seen before. It elevated the status and effectiveness of the basic rifleman, making him the core offensive element of the American military machine. And this is the deep historical truth of the M1 Garand. It didn't just replace the M1903, it completely redefined the role of the American infantryman on the battlefield, giving him the means to fight and win against heavily entrenched or numerically superior forces. The rifle itself was chambered for the powerful .3006 cartridge, the same round used by the M1903. And the bar, which meant logistical simplicity. You didn't have to worry about supplying to different types of ammunition to the front line. The .3006 round was effective out to hundreds of yards. It packed a serious punch. And when delivered in an 8-round burst, it was absolutely devastating. The engineering tolerances on the M1 were famously tight, which was a double-edged sword. Early in the war, some troops in the mud of Italy or the sand of North Africa complained about the rifle jamming if it wasn't kept meticulously clean. But as the manufacturing processes improved and the troops learned the weapon's quirks, the Garand earned its reputation as a rugged, dependable companion, something that could survive the worst hell the war could throw at it. The iconic ping of the clip ejecting has been the subject of countless war stories. And even myths. Some claim the Germans would listen for the ping knowing it meant the G was empty, and would then rush the position, but every veteran who actually fought with the M1 scoffs at that idea in the chaos and noise of battle. That tiny metallic ring was almost impossible to hear over the blasts and the screaming and the constant chatter of automatic weapons, and besides, if a G heard the ping, it meant he was already running for cover to reload, and the enemy was probably already taking cover. From the 8 rounds he just put out, the true story of the ping isn't about vulnerability. It's about confirmation for the soldier. It was the satisfying knowledge that the job was done, the clip was empty, and the fresh one was ready to go in. Now we're just scratching the surface of this incredible weapons legacy. We've got to cover the nightmare of early production, the critical supply chain failures that almost sabotaged D-Day, and the personal stories of the aces who used the Garand to survive impossible situations in places like the Hurtgen Forest and the unforgiving jungles of the Pacific. But before we press on deeper into the mud and the glory of the war, I need you to do me a solid if you're hooked on this kind of raw battlefield history, this look behind the curtain of innovation. And endurance, take a quick second right now and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And please give this video a big thumbs up. Let me know that these stories matter to you, and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think was the biggest tactical advantage the M1 Garand gave the average G. Was it the fire rate, the reliability, or just the simple psychology of knowing you had 8 rounds ready to go? Let's keep this conversation roaring, and don't forget to share this with a friend who needs to hear the story of the greatest battle implement ever devised. We've got a lot more ground to cover, so stick with me. The story of the M1 is only just beginning. Now that we've talked about the theory and the development, let's get into the grim reality of the M1's baptism by fire and the sheer scale of the logistical nightmare that followed. When the United States was dragged into the war after Pearl Harbor, the production of the Garand was still nowhere near the capacity needed to arm a global army. Remember those tight tolerances I mentioned? They made the M1 a precision instrument, but they also made it a pain to mass-produce quickly and cheaply. Every single rifle had to be machined to near perfection, and the US was suddenly trying to equip millions of men who were shipping out to fight in mud, jungle, and ice. The first major combat deployment was in the brutal, unforgiving crucible of the Pacific Theater, specifically places like Guadalcanal. The Marine Corps, initially equipped with a mix of old Springfields and what Garands they could scrounge, quickly found out 2 things. First, the M1's 8-round semi-automatic capability was a lifesaver in the dense, close-quarters jungle fighting, those terrifying Japanese banzai charges, where an enemy force would suddenly erupt from the foliage, were often broken purely by the sustained volume of M1 fire. The Marines didn't have to break their sight picture to work a bolt. They just kept pulling the trigger until the line was broken. Second, they found out the jungle, the eternal sweat, the rust-inducing humidity, the grit, and the sand was absolutely vicious to the M1's complex mechanism. Early reports from the field weren't always glowing, and this is a crucial piece of the story that often gets sanitized. Soldiers complained that if the rifle wasn't kept meticulously cleaned, and oiled a near impossible task when you're sleeping in a swamp it could jam. The tight tolerances that made it so accurate also made it sensitive to foreign debris. But here's where the true American spirit and ingenuity kicked in. The G's and the armorers in the field didn't send the rifles back. They adapted. They learned exactly where to apply oil, how to strip it down to the last pin blindfolded, and they figured out field modifications to keep it running. The problems weren't with the design so much as with the environment, and the soldiers became experts at maintaining their Garands under conditions that would have seized up lesser weapons. Meanwhile, back home, the Industrial War was just kicking off. The government poured billions into expanding production at Springfield and Winchester. But critically, they also brought into new major players, the Harrington and Richardson Arms Company, H&R, and the International Harvester Company, IHC. Yes, the company known for making tractors was suddenly making one of the most advanced rifles in the world. This diversification was key, but it created its own headache. Each manufacturer had slightly different methods and parts, some small. Pieces weren't perfectly interchangeable, causing logistical chaos for the armorers trying to repair guns in forward areas. But by 1943, this industrial machine was beginning to roar, finally solving the production choke points and beginning to flood the training camps and embarkation ports with the M1. The transformation of the infantryman was now complete. When a young private landed in North Africa or Sicily, or trained in England for the coming invasion of Europe, he wasn't just handed a rifle. He was handed a piece of personal artillery. The M1 gave him confidence in every hedgerow and every alleyway. That semi-automatic capability meant the G could dominate the 30-second window of a sudden engagement. He could fire 8 rounds, suppressing the enemy, before a bolt-action user could manage 3 or 4. That difference, those extra 4 or 5 rounds of directed fire, was the difference between life and death for him and his buddies. And this tactical advantage was never more pronounced than in the vicious, drawn-out fighting in Italy. The terrain was awful mountains, deep ravines, and ancient stone villages that made perfect defensive positions. German forces, often armed with the excellent bolt-action Mauser and supported by heavy machine guns, used these strongholds to great effect. But American units, inching forward village by village, found that the sheer volume of their M1 fire could keep German heads down long enough for the squad's automatic weapons to maneuver, or for grenadiers to get into range. It was a war of suppression, and the Garand was the master of suppression. Now, let's talk about the N-block clip again, because it's the signature feature of the M1. The thing everyone remembers. John Garand originally designed the M1 to use a detachable box magazine like the Bar or the Thompson, but the military brass rejected it. Why? Because they feared the average G would lose or damage those precious magazines, rendering the rifle useless. They insisted on the internal, fixed magazine and the 8-round clip system. The clip, the steel carrier, was cheap, disposable, and forced the soldier to reload with a full, fresh 8 rounds every time. It was a stroke of genius forcing discipline and guaranteeing maximum firepower with every reload. It's a classic case of military requirements born from concerns about logistics, and troop discipline actually enhancing the combat effectiveness of a weapon. The legend of the M1 was truly cemented on D-Day. When the American infantry hit the beaches of Normandy, they were the best-equipped force in the world, and the M1 was the primary reason why. Imagine the terror of wading ashore against entrenched machine gun nests. Now imagine doing that with a rifle that requires a slow, deliberate bolt cycle every 2 seconds. The M1 allowed those men to sustain a stream of returning fire against the German positions. On Omaha and Utah beaches, that initial sustained suppressive fire, even from men scrambling for cover, was instrumental in allowing the engineers to breach the defenses and the follow-on waves to secure the beachheads. The M1, the greatest battle implement, was literally the rifle of the invasion. From the chaos of the beaches, the war moved into the nightmare of the bocage, the thick hedgerows of Normandy. This was close quarters, ambush territory, where fighting was measured in feet, not miles. The German soldier was often fighting from behind earthworks and thick vegetation. But the American squad, armed with their M1 South, could instantly overwhelm any ambush position with a torrent of lead. The tactical unit that won the bocage was the G with his Garand. He wasn't just waiting for an order. He was proactively putting out fire, clearing his sector, and using the speed of the M1 to overcome the defensive advantage of the enemy. It was here that General Patton's famous quote truly gained its weight. He saw firsthand how the rifle's speed translated into forward momentum, an offensive tool that few armies had ever possessed. The M1 wasn't just a physical advantage. It was a morale booster. Knowing your weapon could fire 8 times before the guy shooting at you could fire 5. Knowing your rifle was superior gave every G a psychological edge. They knew that in a fair fight, and even in many unfair ones, they had the upper hand. In terms of personal firepower, this confidence was key, especially as the fighting got tougher. Moving across France and into the German Siegfried Line defenses, where every pillbox had to be reduced by grim, deliberate fighting. The ability to instantly transition from long-range precision fire to close-quarters rapid suppression made the M1 the only rifle they wanted. It was part of their identity. We've covered the M1's birth, its industrial transformation, and its critical role in Normandy. But the story isn't over. We still need to discuss the brutal winter campaigns, the challenges of maintenance in the sub-zero temperatures of the Ardennes, and the rifle's lasting influence on post-war small arms design, including its famous successor. If you're still with me, if you're enjoying this deep, human dive into the history of the rifle that won the war, please pause for a moment. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. It helps us keep these stories flowing. Give this video a like to show your support. And I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below with your favorite piece of M1 Garand trivia or a family story about the rifle. And as always, share this with any veteran or history buff you know. We're about to head into the snow and the darkness of the Battle of the Bulge. So let's keep this momentum going. The winter of 1944 brought the fight to a brutal, grinding halt, especially in places like the Hürtgen Forest. Now, if you haven't read the accounts of the Hurtgen, you can't fully grasp the grim reality of it. It was a dark, muddy, cold, claustrophobic meat grinder. The trees were so thick and the visibility so poor that the fighting was essentially done at point-blank range, often hand to hand. This wasn't open-field maneuvering. This was a series of desperate ambushes, and here, the M1 Garand proved its weight in gold, not just because it fired fast, but because of its length and balanced dot at 43.6 inches long. The M1 was certainly a big rifle, especially compared to some of the shorter German carbines. But that length, coupled with its sheer weight, almost 10 pounds fully loaded, made it a potent tool. In the thick woods, you could brace it firmly against a tree or a stump, and the power of the .3006 round wasn't deflected by the brush. More importantly, when the enemy jumped out of a shell crater or a thicket, the M1 was always ready for those quick, reflexive shots. No fumbling with a bolt action in the freezing rain and mud. Just point, squeeze, and deliver 8 rounds of focused justice. But then came the Battle of the Bulge in December '44. This was a different kind of hell. This was about extreme cold and sheer desperation. And this is where the M1's one major early flaw, that need for meticulous cleaning, and its tight tolerances, was tested to the absolute limit. In the sub-zero temperatures of the Ardennes, if a soldier wasn't careful, condensation could freeze inside the gas cylinder, or the freezing oil could gum up the works, slowing the piston and causing misfeeds. These issues weren't widespread, but when your life depended on the gun cycling perfectly, any stoppage felt catastrophic. The GEs, however, were masters of adaptation. They learned to strip down the rifle and use lighter, non-freezing lubricants, or sometimes even just graphite from a pencil or a little kerosene, on the key operating surfaces. The M1's relatively simple field stripping process allowed them to do this under enemy fire, a testament to John Garand's initial focus on maintainability. And what about the German side? What were they fighting with? Primarily the Mauser K98K, a fantastic, reliable bolt-action rifle, absolutely accurate. But they were often supported by the dreaded MG40 machine gun, a truly terrifying piece of engineering, and increasingly, the MP40 submachine gun in close quarters. But the most direct competition to the M1, the Germans' attempt to match its firepower, was the Gehör 43G43. The G43 was a semi-automatic rifle developed later in the war, heavily influenced by the Soviet Tokarev SVT-40. It used a detachable box magazine and had decent accuracy. But the key difference? It was rushed into production, often with lower quality materials, and it never achieved the simplicity, reliability, or sheer volume of the M1 Garand. The American soldier was issued an M1 as standard. The German soldier who got a G43 was considered lucky, and he often found it fragile or prone to jamming. The M1's success wasn't just about the idea of a semi-automatic rifle. It was about the industrial capacity and engineering perfection to deliver it reliably to every single man in the field. The M1 wasn't just a standard rifle, though. Its versatility was also revolutionary. It was easily adapted for use with the M7 rifle grenade launcher, a simple muzzle attachment that allowed the infantryman to fire a high-explosive grenade hundreds of yards further than a hand grenade. This gave the basic rifleman a lightweight, highly effective anti-personnel and anti-bunker capability right at his fingertips. The ability of an entire squad of G is to switch from rapid rifle fire to launching a volley of grenades in seconds was a massive tactical force multiplier, giving the American forces an immense edge in clearing out bunkers and fortified positions like those found on the Siegfried Line. Let's switch theaters and revisit the Pacific one last time. By 1944, in battles like Peleliu and Okinawa, the Garand was the backbone of the Marine assault. The fighting was against deeply entrenched Japanese defenders in caves and concrete fortifications. Here, the M1's 8-round clip wasn't just useful, it was essential. The rate of fire was crucial for suppressing the machine guns long enough for flamethrower teams and demolition squads to close the distance. Japanese resistance was fanatical, and the M1's sustained volume was a literal psychological barrier. When you're crawling up a ridge and the enemy is throwing everything they have at you, the only thing that keeps you moving is the sound of your buddies' Garands spitting lead on your flanks. It was the sound of professional, overwhelming response. The fact that the United States was the only major power to equip its entire infantry force with a standard-issue semi-automatic rifle for the duration of the war is a staggering historical achievement. Think about the logistics involved: designing, manufacturing, shipping, and supplying ammunition for over 5.4 million Garands built between 1936 and 1945. It's a testament to John Garand's perfect design and the unprecedented power of American industry when faced with existential crisis. The M1 Garand didn't just win firefights. It dictated the pace of the American advance, ensuring that the individual soldier had the best chance to survive and succeed on the harshest battlefields the world had ever seen. The legacy is clear. Every modern assault rifle, from the FN-full to the M16, owes a debt to the semi-automatic firepower standards set by this one magnificent rifle. We've covered the grit of the bulge and the dominance the M1 established across both theaters. But we're not quite done with this legend. We still need to discuss the rifle's enduring post-war service, its critical influence on subsequent rifle designs, and some of the more fascinating, lesser-known variants and modifications. Before we jump into the post-war era, I need to take another quick second to connect with you. If you're finding this deep dive into the M1's operational history and engineering evolution as fascinating as I do, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's your support that keeps these incredibly detailed documentaries coming. Give this video a like if you appreciate the effort to bring these stories to life. And let me know in the comments if you've ever had the chance to fire a Garand. That distinctive ping is something you never forget. Share this with your friends who love military history. We've got 2 more segments to go, so stick around and let's finish the story of the rifle that changed everything. The M1 Garand, the greatest battle implement, didn't just fade away when the whistles blew in 1945, it immediately transitioned into its second life as the primary service rifle for the global U.S. military presence during the long, tense years of the Cold War. John Garand's magnificent rifle was still being carried by American troops across the globe. From the garrison in West Germany to the island bases in the Pacific, it was a symbol of American power, reliability, and sheer industrial dominance. But the Garand's final, definitive combat test came just a few years later in the grueling seesaw fighting of the Korean War. The Korean Peninsula, with its steep, icy hills and often brutal winter conditions, once again highlighted both the immense strength and the few remaining weaknesses of the M1. In the close range, desperate firefights against charging Chinese forces, the M1's 8-round semi-automatic advantage was once again the deciding factor. Veterans of Korea speak with reverence about the rifle, crediting its sustained fire with breaking waves of enemy assaults, particularly during the ferocious fighting at places like the Chosin Reservoir. When temperatures plummeted and every piece of metal was screaming under the cold, the M1 still performed, provided the troops now experienced with its quirks used the right maintenance techniques, sometimes resorting to simply wiping all lubrication off the operating rod to prevent freezing. However, the war in Korea also brought the M1 face-to-face with a new kind of enemy doctrine and, more importantly, a new kind of weapon. The Soviet-backed forces were often equipped with submachine guns and eventually the SKS and the AK-47. The AK-47, using the intermediate 7.6 to X39mm round, was a fully automatic rifle fed by a detachable 30-round box magazine. This exposed the M1's fundamental limitation: 8 rounds, then a reload. Military planners quickly realized that while the M1's power and accuracy was superb at longer ranges, the sheer volume of automatic fire and the rapid reload capability offered by detachable magazines were critical in the new reality of short-range, fast-paced conflict. The debate wasn't about whether to go semi-automatic. That ship had sailed thanks to Garand. The new debate was whether the standard infantry rifle needed to be fully automatic and adopt a detachable box magazine. This realization directly led to the development of the M1's intended successor. That successor was the M14 rifle, which was essentially an M1 Garand adapted for a detachable 20-round box magazine and full automatic capability, though the latter was usually locked out in the field due to controllability issues. The M14 used the same basic Garand operating system, the same powerful .30 caliber round now slightly modified to 7.6 to X51mm NATO, and the same principle of gas-operated semi-automatic action. The transition from the M1 to the M14 wasn't just a simple gear change. It was the direct evolution of Garand's genius. The M1 laid the foundation, and the M14 attempted to build on it by adding the features that the Korean War showed were necessary for the future. Now, while the M14 was a solid rifle, it never achieved the widespread production or the beloved reputation of the Garand. It was almost immediately replaced by the M16 during the Vietnam War, marking the final shift to the small caliber. high-velocity intermediate round 5.56 millimeters, and a lightweight assault rifle platform. But here's the crucial point. Every single American rifle that followed the M1, the M14, the M16, and the modern M4 had to be measured against the standard of personal firepower and reliability set by John Garand in the 1930s. The M1 forced the world to acknowledge that the bolt-action rifle was obsolete for frontline service beyond its military service. The M1 Garand has a profound cultural legacy. For generations of veterans, it's not just a rifle. It's a piece of their identity, a symbol of their service in the war that defined their lives. The distinctive ping of that ejecting clip is one of the most recognized sounds in military history, instantly recalling images of American heroism and ingenuity. It's a rifle that inspires confidence and pride. The Garand still sees use today in military drill teams, ceremonial duties, and, perhaps most famously, in the hands of competitive marksmen who utilize its exceptional accuracy. In high-power rifle matches, the M1 Garand remains a collector's dream, a rifle that holds its value and continues to draw new generations of enthusiasts who want to own a piece of that defining moment in history. The story of this rifle, the challenges of its creation, the near-impossible task of mass production, and its pivotal role in winning to major wars, makes it not just a successful weapon, but arguably the single most important firearm in American military history. It redefined the entire concept of infantry warfare, empowering the individual soldier and ensuring that American troops always stepped into battle with a decisive advantage in personal firepower. We've explored the rifle's entire combat life cycle, from Guadalcanal to Korea, and traced its direct influence on the M14 and M16. But there's one final, reflective part of this story. We need to cover the true genius of John Garand and the final, enduring meaning of his legacy for America. Before we wrap up this massive deep dive, I'm going to take this final chance to ask for your support. If this detailed look into the M1 Garand's revolution has resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button one last time to make sure you never miss our historical deep dives. Like the video, and I'd love for you to comment on which post-war rifle you think most successfully carried on the spirit of the M1. And please share this with any friends or family who appreciate true military engineering history. We're going to finish this now by bringing the story back to the man who started it all. The true genius of the M1 Garand isn't just in the metal or the gas system. It's in the story of the man himself, John C. Garand. You know, after designing and perfecting the rifle that literally won the war for the American infantry, a rifle whose production involved billions of dollars and millions of man-hours, Garand didn't become a wealthy titan of industry. He was a civil servant, an employee of the Springfield Armory, and he received no royalties for his invention. He held 45 patents for his work, including his final, perfect gas-operated system. But he sold those rights to the U.S. government for a mere $100. Zero back in 1930 for a fraction of the profits the rifle generated. He lived a modest life, often working on his inventions right up until his death in 1974, always seeing himself as a servant to the soldier and his country, not a businessman. That selfless dedication is a profound part of the M1's legacy. He wasn't flashy. He was simply determined. The fact that he spent nearly 20 years perfecting the design, battling entrenched military bureaucracy, and constantly redesigning after test failures, is a masterclass in engineering grit. The M1 is a testament to the idea that perfection doesn't come quickly. It comes through persistent, painstaking refinement. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important figures in history are the quiet, tireless tinkers working in the background. And the M1's influence didn't stop with just the M14. When the Americans helped rebuild the armies of their allies after the war, the Garand system was often shared or copied. The Italian BM-59, a spectacular rifle developed in the 1950s, was essentially a modernized Garand re-engineered to accept the detachable box magazine and the new NATO cartridge. Even the semi-automatic culture that defined American marksmanship and sport shooting for generations was cemented by the sheer availability and quality of the M1. It's the definitive piece of American military hardware. The M1 Garand wasn't just the right rifle at the right time. It was the rifle that forced a change in military philosophy across the world. Before the M1, the standard was slow, deliberate fire. After the M1, the new baseline for every soldier in every army became sustained, rapid firepower. It ended the age of the bolt-action rifle as the primary infantry weapon. It raised the bar so high that the Axis powers never truly caught up during the conflict, and it forced the Allies' immediate post-war rivals to adopt designs like the AK-47. The M1 is the evolutionary bridge between the traditional rifle and the modern assault weapon. When you hold a Garand today, you don't just feel the weight of the metal and the warmth of the walnut stock. You feel the weight of history. You feel the millions of rounds that flew across the beaches of Normandy, through the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and over the hills of Korea. You hear the phantom sound of the M1 ping, a sound that, for the American soldier, meant the job was done and it was time for the next 8 rounds. It is, and remains, the rifle that made the American infantryman the most fearsome and effective foot soldier of World War II, giving him the decisive technological edge he needed to win. General Patton wasn't wrong. It truly was the greatest battle implement ever devised. And there you have it. The full, complete story of the M1 Garand, the rifle that revolutionized warfare and defined a generation of American servicemen. We've gone from John Garand's early sketches to the sub-zero horror of the bulge, tracing every critical step of this magnificent weapons journey. If this massive deep dive into history and engineering has captivated you, I sincerely hope you'll do one last thing for me. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It's the fuel that keeps these detailed historical narratives alive. Give this video a big final like to show your appreciation for the sheer grit and genius of the M1. And take a moment to share this entire story with anyone who needs to understand how one rifle truly changed the course of world events. Thank you for joining me by the fireside for this epic tale.